Have you ever wondered what Emu is, or what he even looks like? How can inanimate objects have devil fruit powers? What about Blackbeard's secret of eating more than one devil fruit? What if I told you all of these mysteries are connected? In today's video, we're going to be deep diving into these popular One Piece mysteries for some answers. Before we start, I'd like to give a big shout out to my friend Dak Sake because his emu video was a huge inspiration for me to make this one. If you'd like to check his video out, the link will be in the description. So let's get started. Emu was first introduced in the story in chapter 906, which is relatively late to establish a character who may be the final villain of the entire story. But there's a reason for that. Emu is a Shadow King. He rules from behind the scenes with only a select few knowing about his existence, and I believe him being a Shadow King has a deeper meaning than anyone even realizes. Starting off with chapter 1163, we have a rare instance of Emu actively getting involved in the story by possessing Saint Saturn's body to fight against rocks and all the pirates on God Valley. What I found strange about this encounter is Emu's appearance. He's still the same silhouette we've only ever seen him as, and I found it strange because characters are engaging with him, so why is Oda still hiding his appearance? Well, with the chapter 1165, it was confirmed that this is Emu's appearance, or at least this version of him, because Roger asked Scarp if he knew about the world government having ties to the black monster they just fought. So, if Emu does look like this, then what is he? One simple answer is it's the work of a devil fruit power, but I think it could be something much more than that. If you look at Emu's appearance and had to guess what he looks like compared to anything we've already seen in One Piece, what would be your guess? I think it's pretty obvious that Emu looks like a shadow. So, what if he actually is a shadow? To really understand this, we need to go all the way back to Thriller Bark and revisit everything we learned about shadows. The main antagonist of Thriller Bark was Gecko Moria. I strongly believe Gecko Moria was a huge inspiration and foreshadowing for what Oda would use to create Emu's character. Gecko Moria and Thriller Bark share so many parallels to Emu, it's honestly crazy, and as you watch this video, you'll understand that the secrets to Emu were hidden in plain sight. Gecko Moria is the user of the Kage Kage no Mi, or the Shadow Devil Fruit. One interesting thing about Moria's Devil Fruit is that out of all the Devil Fruits whose user receives a descriptive classification, the Shadow Devil Fruit is the only power so far whose user is not classified as some sort of human. For example, Luffy is a rubber human, Akainu is a magma human, and Ace was a fire human. You get the point. Even though Moria doesn't follow this pattern, he still has his own unique Devil Fruit nickname, which is the Ruler of Shadows. And I believe there is a very important reason Oda deliberately made this distinction, which I will bring up shortly in this video. Now, let's talk about Moria's Devil Fruit powers. He has the ability to cut off someone's shadow and make a contract with it to become its master, and insert that stolen shadow inside a corpse, with the resulting product becoming an obedient zombie that Moria has complete control over. The person whose shadow is taken to achieve this process loses consciousness for 2 days and is sent out to sea, so they have a harder time reclaiming and becoming one with their shadow ever again. This shadowless person also becomes vulnerable to the sun. If they come in contact with sunlight, they burn up and die, resulting in the death of their stolen shadow as well. Once a person loses their shadow, they are forced to avoid sunlight indefinitely in order to survive. The only ways for them to recover their shadow are to either purify the zombie that possesses it using salt, or completely destroy that zombie's body. The only other possible method is to have Moria himself command the shadow to return, because simply defeating Moria does not cause the stolen shadows to go back to their original owners. This arc also reveals that shadows have some interesting and unique properties. In chapter 455, Brook explains that shadows possess souls of their own, souls that are bound to their master's movements. That master is the physical body to which the shadow is connected. A person's shadow is supposed to follow the body from birth to death, which is a natural law within the world. What I want to focus on here is the fact that shadows have their own souls separate from the body's soul. I can understand that Oda created shadows having souls to fit the narrative of the story he wanted to tell in Thriller Bark, but with how important souls and wills are in One Piece, I can't help but to wonder if there's way more to it than just being a one and done concept. And if you break it down, if a shadow has its own soul, wouldn't that mean it's its own living thing? And since the natural law of the world says it's bound to its master to follow everything the body does, then a shadow is like a slave that has no chance to ever break free, with the single exception being the Shadow Devil Fruit. Shadows can be separated from their masters with this power, but they just become slaves to a new owner, the wielder of the Shadow Devil Fruit, the ruler of shadows. The point I want to make here is, are there any scenarios where a shadow can become become its own master? I think there is, and our answer is devil fruits. We can use Chopper as our example. He was a normal reindeer before he ate the human fruit and then became a human reindeer, granting him sentience and a will. So, if we apply that logic to shadows, who in theory should be able to wield the devil fruit power because they have a soul, then what would happen if someone separated a shadow from its corresponding body and then fed it a devil fruit? Specifically, a human-type zone devil fruit. I think the shadow would gain sentience just like Chopper did. And, just like Chopper becoming a reindeer human, this act would also make the shadow become a shadow human, which is why I think Oda made that distinction with Moria's devil fruit classification of him not being referred to as a shadow human because they already exist. And if you don't think a shadow is capable of consuming a devil fruit, I think there may already be evidence in the story to prove they can. Vegapunk discovered a way to feed devil fruits to inanimate objects, and to this day we still don't know how that process works. We've seen multiple examples of this. Funkfried, Spandam Sword, that was fed the Elephant Zone devil fruit and can transform into a living elephant. Mr. Four's bazooka, Lasso, which was fed a Dog Zone devil fruit and gained the ability to become a living dog. So, what if the trick to feeding inanimate objects devil fruits is through their shadows? Inanimate objects don't have souls, which I believe are necessary to house devil fruit powers, but some inanimate objects clearly have wills of their own, like poneglyphs, swords, and even ships. And in the story of One Piece, wills and souls are very much linked to one another. I'm not sure if a will is enough to replicate a soul, but every physical object can cast a shadow, and shadows are confirmed to have souls. If an object's shadow consumes a devil fruit, I think that power can also manifest through the object, because by the natural law of the world, the body and shadow must mirror each other. So, if a shadow has a devil fruit power, the object would as well. Moria shows us this with the Shadow Devil Fruit's ability known as Shadow Revolution. When Luffy's shadow was placed inside Oars did not get Luffy's Devil Fruit powers because Devil Fruit abilities don't carry over to their shadows. However, Moria was able to twist and manipulate Oars' own shadow to mimic Luffy's rubber powers. I think this is exactly why only Zone Devil Fruits can be fed to inanimate objects, because zones grant a form of consciousness. If a zone is fed to a shadow, it would then gain consciousness to a degree, resulting in it being able to make its own actions. Those actions would then be reflected onto the physical object it's connected to, just like how Shadow Revolution works. And in recent chapters, we've been given even more examples of inanimate objects wielding Devil Fruit powers. Shamrock's sword possesses the Cerberus zone, and Loki's hammer, Ragnir, wields a Squirrel zone. The very first example of an object having a Devil Fruit power dates all the way back to chapter 184, and we learn that same chapter that inanimate objects eating Devil Fruits is the latest technology. Later we learn in chapter 433 from Kobe that Vegapunk was the one who developed this technology. We're almost 1200 chapters deep and we're still in the dark on this process. What's interesting to me is that even after an entire arc centered around Vegapunk on Egghead Island, Oda still chose not to reveal the secret process, and that would have been the perfect time to. That tells me the secret may be tied to much larger mysteries, ones Oda still doesn't want to reveal just yet. And that's why I'm confident this is connected directly to the secrets surrounding Emu and Blackbeard. And one last thing before we move on. The fact that Devil Fruit powers from the body do not carry over to its corresponding shadow is very telling for something else. Now let's bring this back to Emu. If Emu was originally a shadow that was fed a devil fruit, whether it was intentional or not, specifically a human zone type devil fruit, this shadow creature might be the first of its kind to have ever gained sentience. And if a shadow were to gain sentience, what do you think their mindset would be like? I think they would hold an immense hatred for the world because of the natural law of the world. Shadows are eternal slaves to their counterpart bodies. How would you feel if your entire existence and actions were forever controlled by someone else and there was nothing you can do about it? You literally can't even speak. In a story with heavy themes about freedom and characters' desire to be the freest, there's an entire population of beings that have been slaves since the dawn of time, shadows. In a world where the savior and progenitor of liberation is symbolized through the sun god, I can't help but see the irony in that. The sun, which produces the light of the world, also inadvertently creates shadows, slaves to the light. If Emu is one of these shadow creatures, then he would without a doubt have a great hatred for the one they call the sun god and humans in general. You may have noticed there is a major plot hole in this theory. Nerona Emu has been established to have been one of the original 20 kings that formed the world government. with Ivankov even reinforcing this idea by theorizing that this emu person that Sabo witnessed in the Holy Land could be the same emu from over 800 years ago, with the help of the immortality surgery from the apop fruit. So with that being said, how can emu be a shadow? Well, I think both can be true. I think this shadow creature possessed the real Nerona emu's body. In Thriller Bark, we're made aware that not only can shadows be placed inside of corpses creating zombies, but shadows can also be placed inside living bodies as well. Luffy is our example. He not only had a shadow placed inside his body, but over 100 shadows, and we get more details on what happens when shadows are placed inside living bodies. If your mind and will are weak, you just pass out and the shadow doesn't take. But if you are strong-willed enough, then you actually fuse with the shadow and gain the battle abilities of that shadow. For example, the first shadow placed inside of Luffy belonged to a skilled Navy swordsman. Afterwards, Luffy instantly became skilled with a sword, an ability he didn't have before. We're also told something else. This shadow power-up isn't permanent when placed inside a living body. There's a time limit. But the thing I want to focus on here is what Oda specifically says about a shadow fusing with a living body. He says, a living body that has a soul. This basically means two souls cannot inhabit the same body permanently. This specific fusion has a temporary time limit. I believe this is what makes the current emu unique. What if emu is the combination of a soulless living body that has a shadow placed inside of it? Since the body would technically still be alive, this fusion would be something we've never seen before. And with our example of Luffy once again, after he absorbed 100 shadows, he was still in control of his body. I think emu would be the opposite of that, where the shadow half of him would take control of the living body, possessing it because there isn't a soul to counteract the shadow's soul. Emu being possessed is a widely popular theory because the only defined feature we have of emu are their ringed eyes, which is something we've seen with another character that seems to be possessed, Cavendish. Cavendish has an alter ego called Hakuba. We don't know the specifics to how Cavendish has this other personality or became possessed, but when Cavendish and Hakuba fight for control over their body, they developed ringed eyes almost exactly like emus. But for this idea to work, there must be a way a living body can be soulless, and I think there are a couple of logical ways. Big Mom's soul fruit is the first thing that comes to mind. Maybe Nerona Emu's soul was taken by means of that devil fruit. There's also Kuma's devil fruit, which can remove intangible things like memories and pain. This could be another way a soul can potentially be removed from the body, which is interesting because Vegapunk alludes to this when he's discussing Kuma's powers, and the topic of the soul existing and leaving the body upon death come up in their discussion. But another idea that seems even more fitting is the devil. Emu has shown us that his power seems to stem from something demonic, and one of the things associated most with the real world devil are people making deals with him, usually in terms of selling their soul in exchange for power. So, going back to my idea of a shadow gaining the power of a devil fruit, specifically a human zone one granting the shadow sentience, what if this devil fruit power was also something demonic, like a Hito Hito no Mi model devil or Satan? Now let's go back 800 years to the War of the Ancient Kingdom and the 20 Kings. I'd imagine the 20 Kings had a very slim chance of winning the war. The Ancient Kingdom was said to have super advanced technology, in possession of the ancient weapons, and had Joy Boy on their side. The 20 Kings would have to go to desperate measures to win at any cost, maybe even going as far as selling their souls to achieve victory. So what if the 20 Kings, or just King Nerona Emu himself, tried to summon the devil to win the war? But similarly to what ended up happening to Brook when he was sent to Namakura Island, is Nerona Emu didn't summon the actual devil, but ended up summoning the shadow creature that had the mythical zone Satan fruit. This shadow creature would go along with this idea of being a demon and offer to give King Nerona Emu power in exchange for his body. Even with a shadow having a devil fruit power, I think it still needs to be attached and possess a physical body to be able to move. And remember, Moria needed corpse bodies to be able to utilize the shadows he stole, strengthening this idea even more that shadows need to fuse with some kind of physical body. This shadow creature would see the massive opportunity laid out in front of him, his means to an end, a body he can possess that would give him freedom to control his own actions, and the power of 20 unified kingdoms under his rule to start his grand plan for the world. And even in Brook's version, the people that thought they summoned him offered their immortal souls in exchange to win their war. The only thing stopping a shadow from permanently staying inside a living body is its soul, and if this shadow creature has some kind of demon mythical zone power, I wonder if he can take or remove people's souls souls and in exchange give them power. This would be the inverse of Moria's power, where Moria can take people's shadows, Imu would be taking their souls. This could explain the Gorosei's mysterious powers. When they were introduced along with their demonic forms, which resemble zones, Oda usually inserts a description box along with the person's name and devil fruit name. In this instance, Oda just tells us what each Gorosei are. There's no mention of their power coming from devil fruits they may have eaten. They are just referred to as different yokai. There's also the chance the Gorosei and Imu could be literal demons. While I was a firm believer in that idea, I think Imu giving the Gorosei their powers to make them into demons makes more sense because we have more evidence of that in the story. For example, when Imu killed Saturn, it looks like he stripped away whatever power Saturn had, which means it was most likely a power given to him by Imu. This reminds me of the Shadow, Hobby, and Soul devil fruits. All three of these devil fruits can create new races, like zombies, toys, and homies, and they can also remove the power given to them whenever they want. So I think it could be as simple as Imu can make a new race of people called demons because of his devil fruit power. And if the Gorosei and God Knights all have powers given to them by Imu's devil fruit, I think this can be our explanation as to why they don't take permanent damage. They can be damaged, but always reform and regenerate. If we go back to Moria once again, he used an ability called Doppelman, where he can summon his own shadow to fight for him. Luffy battled the shadow and was able to damage it, but it just kept reforming itself and healing. Luffy couldn't do any permanent damage to it. This is something that seems almost identical to how the God Knights and Gorosei's apparent immortality works. So is it too far-fetched to believe this could be the work of shadow powers? If Imu has powers that are in a similar regard to Moria, then what if the Gorosei and God Knights are just shadow versions of themselves with the help of Imu's power? When Moria separates someone's shadow, he must make a contract with it in order to become its master. What if Imu can do the inverse of this, where his devil fruit power has the ability to remove someone's soul, and then he can make a contract with them to become their master? And instead of putting someone else's shadow inside of them to replace the soul, since he himself is a shadow, what if he's able to give them a piece of himself? This could also explain how he's just able to possess people connected to him instantly like Gunko and Saturn. It's very reminiscent of another one of Moria's abilities of changing places instantly with his own shadow. And speaking of the similarity of how Imu does contracts like Moria, chapter 1167 shows us that there are 3 types of contracts of the Abyssal Mark. The first one is the Shallow Contract, which is the lowest of the 3 contracts, followed by the Depths Contract and the Abyssal Contract. Since Harold and Shanks both had the Shallows Contract, this is just a surface level contract, meaning Imu hasn't removed your soul or the person hasn't offered their soul to Imu. The Gorosei even confirmed this by saying the Depths Contract and the Abyssal Contract are the only ones who enter a contract with the true God. They even state that the 2 higher contracts are reserved for only 13 exclusive individuals, which is interesting because I wonder if that's as far as Imu can extend his shadow power. Another interesting fact is that when Luffy tells Moria that he's going to be the Pirate King, Moria tells Luffy that Luffy's shadow said the same thing and tells us why. When there's an extreme size difference between the shadow and the body, the personality of the shadow's original owner lingers on. But it's only a matter of time before the memories that shadow has eventually go away. So I wonder if Imu's shadow falls into that same problem, but it's the opposite where his shadow is large because I think he was originally connected to a giant's body and the body he merged with is small because Naroni Imu was a human. So because of the shadow and body size difference, he must separate pieces of his shadow by giving it to the Gorosei and God Knights, or else the memories from the person's shadow he comes from remain, which I believe shadows absolutely do not want because they want to have their own individuality. Memories also come from the body itself, which is another connection to Thriller Bark. Characters like Sindri and Ryuma still maintain pieces of their original personalities even though their souls were gone and they were corpses with someone else's shadow inside of them. This reminds me of Gunko. Her memories of her past and of Brook were starting to come back to her, which prompted Imu to possess her and override those memories. This also makes me think about Naroni Imu, the person's memories. I find it strange that Imu is this extremely evil entity, but he also has feelings of love for Nefertari D. Lily. I'm willing to bet Naroni Imu, the person's memories sometimes override Shadow Imu's power, which is why we saw him staring at Lily's portrait, because he must have been in love with her and is remembering. Which comes full circle again because Emu's obsession with Lily and wanting Vivi is just like Hogback's obsession with Sindri. And this leads me to my next point. One major thing I haven't talked about yet is if Emu is a shadow, then whose shadow did he come from? This is something I still haven't figured out completely, but the first thing that comes to mind is Nika. Since Nika is the sun god, can you imagine the shadow that was linked to him? That shadow would get a first row seat at its natural enemy, thematically the reason all shadows are slaves. And I think this fits narratively well because we must think about who the enemy was in the first world. We know from the Harley text there's 3 worlds. The current world is Luffy's battle, and we know that Emu is obviously the enemy. In the second world, it was Joy Boy versus Emu. And to me, that's a clear pattern that in every era the sun god fights whatever Emu is. So we can safely guess that Emu was most likely the villain in the first world, but we don't know if Nerona Emu the person was around since the first world. That's why I believe strongly that whatever the other half of Emu is, whether he's a shadow or the devil himself, has been the villain since the very beginning. And if this shadow is Nika's shadow, it made me think of the complications of that. For example, remember one of the side effects of when someone has their shadow removed is that they cannot live under the sun. They die and so does their shadow. So Shadow Emu would have to come up with a plan to counter this just like Moria did. This instantly makes me think of Enies Lobby, where it's always sunny. To this day, this is still a big mystery, and we don't know why it's like that. It could be the result of the Pika Pika no Mi's awakening power, but what if there's more to it than just being an area affected by Alogia's awakening? What if Enies Lobby is a prison that houses Nika's body? If the true Emu is a shadow, then his corresponding body must still be alive or else he'd die too. And what if Nika's body is in the hole in the center of Enies Lobby? Nika would never be able to escape the hole because the sun never stops shining above. This prison would symbolize what the sun does to shadows. Nika would forever be a slave to the sun, the very thing he represents. Shadow Emu would face another problem. Nika's body would eventually die from mortality, so how could Shadow Emu counter that? That answer is simple, the immortality surgery from the Op fruit. Something that we know is directly connected to Emu. Shadow Emu would have made a past user of the Op fruit make Nika immortal and place him inside the perfect prison he could never attempt to escape. The hole in Enies Lobby. This would secure Shadow Emu's life from ever being affected by his corresponding living body. I think Emu being a shadow also supports why he has a freezer chamber like Moria did. The reason Moria had freezer chambers was because he stored all his corpse bodies from decomposing in there before he could fuse a shadow into them. Moria also stored his secret weapon in there, the legendary continent puller, Oars. The Holy Land is rumored to have its very own national treasure that Doflamingo claimed could shake the world. I believe that national treasure is a powerful body paralleling Oars. Now, for what that body is, I think it could be several things. It could be a body that controls the ancient weapon Uranus, which would explain how the world government deleted Lelucia. It could also be the forest god or the earth's god's bodies. Whatever it is, it's immensely powerful because Doflamingo was convinced that if he had Law's fruit the specific day he discovered whatever it would give him the power to control the world. Now we must put that into perspective. Doflamingo highlights the 2 powers he needed from the Op fruit to achieve this, the personality switching technique and the immortality surgery. Many fans believe that Doflamingo just wanted to personality switch into Emu's body and that's it. But if that were the case, why would he also need the immortality surgery if Emu's body is highly suggested to already be immortal? That's why I think Doflamingo's real plan was to personality swap into whatever the powerful body was in Emu's freezer chambers and then have the immortality surgery performed on the body, making him an all-powerful immortal being, which once again I think was foreshadowed in Thriller Bark, with Moria operating Oars' body from the inside. Oars' body is essentially immortal since he's a zombie, and Moria being inside controlling him is a physical representation of the personality switching technique's power. If the real Emu is a shadow, then I believe he can freely use this powerful body whenever he wants. As a shadow creature, I think he can body hop from one body to another without needing the personality switching technique. I think he stores the body in a freezer chamber like Oars' body to stop the aging process on it. I think whatever this body is, it's still a living thing with a soul, so Emu can't possess it permanently, only temporarily, because remember, a living body with a soul cannot fuse with a shadow forever. There's a time limit. And Emu can't grant it immortality like the Gorosei God Knights because I believe for that to happen, the person has to offer their soul up willingly to Emu for him to grant that power in return, which this person doesn't want. Now for my favorite part of this theory, the man himself, Blackbeard, and more specifically, his devil fruit, the Yami Yami no Mi, or the Dark Dark fruit. Blackbeard's father, Rox, knew of Imu's existence and had his own plan to turn the world upside down. To do that, he needed 2 devil fruits, one that King Harold would need to eat to fully utilize its power, and another that remains shrouded in mystery. Given how determined Blackbeard was to find the Dark Dark fruit, so much so that he outright states he would have abandoned his dreams if he never found it, I believe this is the very same devil fruit Rox was searching for, because Blackbeard is carrying on his father's will and dream. I think the Dark Dark fruit is crucial for 2 major reasons. First, I believe it's the reason as to how Blackbeard can eat multiple devil fruits, and second, I believe it's one of 3 devil fruits capable of defeating Imu. Let's start off with the first reason. One of the most important foundations of this theory is the idea that shadows possess a soul of their own. Brook is the one who tells us this, and I don't think this is common knowledge in the world of One Piece. I believe devil fruits and souls are essentially synonymous with one another. When someone eats a devil fruit, it merges with their soul, which is why most people can only consume 1 devil fruit, because most people only have 1 soul. But what most people don't realize is they actually have 2, the soul of the body and the soul of the shadow. The tricky part is feeding a devil fruit to your shadow. I believe Blackbeard is fully aware that feeding a shadow a devil fruit is possible because he knows what Imu really is, a shadow that possesses a devil fruit power. And that knowledge is what gave Blackbeard the confidence to take the leap of faith and risk of getting his second devil fruit power. Now let me explain why I think Blackbeard needed the Dark Dark fruit to consume a second devil fruit. The only fruit in existence that has control over shadows is the Shadow Devil Fruit, and obviously Moria is its current user. I think the only way to properly feed a devil fruit to a shadow is when the shadow becomes a tangible thing. It becomes tangible when the user of the Shadow Devil Fruit grabs someone's shadow and severs its connection to the real body, and then it becomes its own entity. At this point, I think if you were to have a devil fruit on hand and you merge it into the shadow, that shadow would consume the devil fruit, which is how I think Shadow Imu was created. Now obviously, Blackbeard can't do this because he doesn't have the Shadow Devil Fruit, but I think there are ways to get around that, which Vegapunk also discovered. Think about what shadows are. They're an area of darkness created when an object is blocking a light source. Blackbeard ate the Dark Dark Fruit. He's a darkness man. When Blackbeard attempted to steal Whitebeard's devil fruit power, his crew placed a giant black cloth over himself and Whitebeard's body. This would create an environment under the cloth of total darkness. Now, if a shadow only forms when a body blocks a light source, where does the shadow go when there's total darkness? Shadows have their own soul. There's no way they just disappear into nothingness. I think shadows are able to be free when there's darkness everywhere, since they technically are darkness as well. Light is what binds them to objects. And this is how I think Blackbeard was able to eat a second devil fruit. If a shadow is darkness and he's under a black cloth making the environment around him darkness, then I think he can use his devil fruit power as a makeshift mouth per se for his shadow. His devil fruit absorbs everything. I think when Whitebeard died and his devil fruit was in the process of leaving his body to reincarnate, Blackbeard was able to absorb the devil fruit's soul and merge it into his own shadow. This would mean Blackbeard himself didn't technically eat 2 devil fruits, which would cause him to die. His shadow ate the devil fruit, and remember the natural law of the world. Bodies and shadows must mimic each other. Whatever one does, the other must as well. If Blackbeard's shadow has a devil fruit power, then that means he has the devil fruit power as well. Going back once again, Moria twisted Orz's shadow to mimic Luffy's devil fruit power, and Orz's real body reflected those actions. I think this was Oda flat out showing us the secret trick of how to obtain 2 devil fruits without dying. And I want you to understand how impossibly insane Blackbeard's achievement is. The Gorosei talked about how no one in history other than Blackbeard has ever been able to eat 2 devil fruits and survive. So you have to put that into perspective. If anyone knew the secret to having 2 devil fruit powers, it would be the Gorosei. I wonder if the Gorosei aren't fully aware of what Imu really is, which is why they're oblivious to this secret, and Blackbeard knows because of Rox. And Blackbeard just had a genius idea and figured, well, I also have a shadow. What would happen if I fed it a devil fruit? That gamble paid off handsomely. Now let's talk about why the Dark Dark Fruit is one of 3 devil fruits that I believe can counter Imu. If Imu is a shadow that is only sentient because it consumed a devil fruit, then the Dark Dark Fruit is an absolute natural counter to Imu, because the Dark Dark Fruit can nullify devil fruit powers. If Blackbeard can nullify Imu's devil fruit, then he would just revert back to a normal powerless shadow. That's why I think Rox needed this fruit so bad and knew without it he couldn't do anything to Imu, which we saw in the Flower Garden encounter. The exact quote is, "He did not do anything more than this, as he knew he could not, but before he departed he left with a warning. I will be me right back here. The fact that Rox, an immensely powerful character, couldn't defeat Imu's real body confirms to me that Imu cannot be killed by conventional means, and this is something we've already seen hinted at through the God Knights and their apparent immortality. Rox must have passed the secrets about Imu down to Iris, who in turn told Blackbeard, because we know Iris escaped with Blackbeard from God Valley, so she must have raised him. And from that moment on, Blackbeard made it his life's goal to find the Dark Fruit to give him the ability and chance to finally beat Imu. The second devil fruit that I believe can counter Imu is the sun god Nika fruit. This one is obvious since the Gorosei were so afraid of its power awakening and with how terrified Imu is of Joy Boy, who was a past user of this devil fruit. And I actually believe it's going to take Luffy and Blackbeard working together to take down Imu. The last devil fruit should be the most obvious, the shadow devil fruit. This one really doesn't need explanation, but if Imu is a shadow, then he would obviously fear the shadow devil fruit since it has complete dominion over shadows themselves. And I think there is evidence to show Imu does fear this devil fruit. Remember at the end of the Marineford War, Doflamingo was tasked with killing Moria. Moria assumes it was an order from Sengoku, but Doflamingo says it was someone even higher up. The consensus here is that Moria was deemed too weak to be considered a warlord anymore because of his defeat from the Straw Hats. It would make the world government look weak. Maybe I'm looking too hard into this, but what if that wasn't the entire reason? What if Imu fears the Shadow Devil Fruit and saw a great opportunity to take out Moria and secure his Devil Fruit? The final piece of this theory comes down to one question. What is Imu's endgame? I think the answer is surprisingly simple. I believe Imu wants to return the world to total darkness, the complete opposite of Luffy's goal of bringing about the dawn. In the Harley text, the first world is described as being shrouded in death and darkness. I don't think that line is figurative at all. I believe it directly connects to Blackbeard stating that the Dark Fruit is the most evil power in history. And ironically, I don't think Imu's goal is domination. I think it's liberation, just like Sun God Nika. Imu wants to free the world. The only difference is what they want to liberate. Nika brings freedom to people enslaved by oppression. Imu, on the other hand, wants to free shadows. As I've said before, I believe shadows are truly free only in darkness. Without light, shadows would never be bound to anyone. They would exist independently, unchained by natural law. I believe Blackbeard's Dark Fruit isn't just a counter to Imu, it's the key to making Imu's dream a reality, and he may be using Blackbeard as a pawn unbeknownst to Blackbeard himself. Think about this, the Dark Fruit is listed in the Devil Fruit Encyclopedia, while the Nika Fruit wasn't recorded even in the oldest known Devil Fruit text. Vegapunk tells us it was deliberately erased from history, and the Gorosei even changed its name to the Gum Fruit to hide its existence entirely. So that raises an important question. Why wouldn't Imu do the same thing to the Dark Fruit, especially when it's heavily implied to be a potential counter to him? Then there's one last detail that ties everything together. Blackbeard's own nature symbolizes shadows. He literally hid himself in Whitebeard's shadow, never trying to make a name for himself and waiting for the right moment to make his move. He has an attack called Liberation. Luffy, as Sun God Nika, is known as the Warrior of Liberation because he frees the enslaved. Luffy and Blackbeard are two sides of the same coin. So who exactly is Blackbeard liberating? The thing he quite literally represents: shadows. That's it for this theory. As always, I'd love to know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, I would very much appreciate it if you could leave a like and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.